Chicago sports fans blessed to have read the writings of some of the finest sports storytellers in town. John P. Carmichael, Ring Lardner, Bob Verdi, Mike Royko, a terrific sports writer himself, Ron Rapoport, found some of the classic columns and made them part of a new book called From Black Sox to Three-Peats, a century of Chicago's best sports writing. In our Fox feature presented by Xfinity, I asked Rapoport how he got this project started.
And this is what I've got in mind, is an anthology of columns going back to Lardner, over 100 years. Send me some of your best stuff. Well, here you've got some really great writers, and now they're sending me some of their best things. And, you know, it was just wonderful, and I was able to see I had sort of an idea, a template of what would be in the book. So when I went back to the earlier eras of Jerry Holtzman and Bill Gleason and John P. Carmichael and the great Wendell Smith and Warren Brown, now I sort of had a sense of how the book would shape up, and then I went back even farther to the Ring Lardner era. This was a ball putting this together.
How has sports writing as a whole changed?
In the olden days, back in the days of Ring Lardner and Hugh Fullerton, and they were wonderful writers, Chicago has been blessed by not only their fascinating teams and fascinating players and hilarious things that have happened in this town, but also by a century of great writers. But in that era, they were a little more remote. They didn't talk to the players after the games. For instance, there's a column in the book by Westbrook Pegler, of all people, who became this very reactionary political columnist. But he was a dream as a sports columnist. He covered Babe Ruth's called shot at Wrigley Field, and he was all over it. He actually used the words the next day in the paper, Ruth called his shot. Like all the other reporters at that game, he didn't go down into the locker room afterwards and said, "Hey, Babe, when you were pointing at center field, what did you mean?" Which is why, one of the reasons why it's controversial to this day about whether Ruth was actually pointing to center field. It was different then. They didn't
talk to the players after the games, but I'm left with the feeling that the relationships with the players back then were better, were more trusting than they are today. Today, I find them to be incredibly contentious.
Well, it's gotten very bad now in this era, and it's true. Now, I mean, now they all have public relations men and people, and they're all worried about endorsements and so on, so they're being told to be cagey, and even when you do get to them.
Is there one Chicago sports story that most of them felt was the best run?
I think there are two. I think it's a tie for first place. One is Super Bowl 20, because it's a Bears town, and it was a great team, and it was a nutty team. You know, the punky QB and the Super Bowl shuffle and all this stuff. And those guys were great, and they didn't care who said what about anybody. They had Buddy Ryan and Ditka. There was so much to cover. That was number one. And second would be Michael. I mean, you know, he's the only athlete in the book who gets his own section. He was too big to just have a couple of pieces, so I just put a section there, like 6 writers who try to come to terms with him there. Then there's the other thing about Chicago. There are so many things that have happened in this town, sports, that you can't imagine happening anywhere else, and they're part of the civic lore. And they run through the whole span of this book, From Black Sox to Three-Peats. Start with the Black Sox themselves, only in Chicago. Go to Babe's Called Shot, you know, only in Chicago. Go to Disco Demolition Night. That's not going to happen in Cincinnati. Go to Lee Elia cursing out the fans. Remember, 85% of the people are working for a living, and the other 15% come to Wrigley Field to boo for the Cubs. Only in Chicago. Bob Verdi has a hilarious piece about being in a room with Jim McMahon before Super Bowl 20, just after he's had acupuncture treatments. I won't spoil it for you. It's a riot. But McMahon, acupuncture, Super Bowl 20, it's not, that's Chicago. And then there's poor Steve Barton. Where else could a thing like that happen? I mean, as a sports writer working in this town, and the sports writers still here, they've been blessed.
Great stories from Ron Rapoport. I'm telling you, go out and get the book. It's just great, great, great writings. You were telling me earlier that you got close to longtime prep writer Taylor Bell, who's with the Chicago Sun-Times forever. What did he mean to you as you were getting ready for college in the University of Illinois?
Well, I think it even goes back further than that. As a grammar school player, you're starting to go through the newspaper, and you're really flipping. For me, it was flipping right to the high school sports. So it was an opportunity to read about Taylor Bell and the players that were playing so well and doing great things at the high school level, because that's as far as I can see. I want to play high school football and really sports in general, and then having a chance to read him and then having him cover me and then continue to read him on pass. I know he's a fantastic writer, and there's some great writers in this book, but for me there was a personal connection because that was the guy who really got me reading the newspaper.
Did you ever think that you'd be sitting alongside doing TV? I mean, not only here on The Final Word, but on the Big Ten Network when you talked to a Taylor Bell getting ready for U of I?
You know, not at that point. I really didn't think I wanted a career in broadcast until I really got into college and toward the end of my years there. I was having fun talking to the media and said, hey, this is a pretty neat gig.
At no time you ever said, hey, this is pretty easy.
No chance.
Good.